Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. If you followed my last, handful of videos, I did mention a couple of times that I was going to do this new series, or at least, kind of branch out a little bit, and talk not only about heroic stories that draw inspiration, or that give us inspiration and give me inspiration, but also talk about some of the music. I was a big, kind of hard rock fan growing up. Aerosmith, Van Halen, all these kind of bands and whatnot. Hair metal of the 80s, love that. But everybody's got their favorite albums. Kind of formative music that help form you at different times or whatever. And I did notice that, and occasionally when I would mention or I would talk about the old hard rock comics or whatnot, I would mention or I would find out that a lot of my listeners do like, somewhere around the same genre of music. So I thought I would go to like my 5 top favorite albums, but specifically talk about why I draw inspiration from them. Not just how I really love that, guitar riff and whatnot, but I really, draw inspiration from them. I do, play bass, played bass in bands here and there growing up and whatnot, throughout my 20s and stuff. Don't really do it much anymore. But yeah, so I know a little bit of kind of just garage rock music kind of thing like that. But these albums are more than that because of where the artists were at the time they made them, and because of the messages of the music. So let's get into it. First up is Alice Cooper. I'm a huge Alice Cooper fan, and it's not an easy job to pick my favorite album of Alice Cooper. But The Last Temptation came out in 1994. Talk a little bit about this and why this is the one I would choose and what was so big about it. So Alice Cooper, of course, the godfather of shock rock. He came about in the 60s with his original band, and the band was called Alice Cooper because they thought it was funny. All these other bands, they liked the Beatles, they liked all this stuff, so they were doing music in the 60s like a lot of other rock bands, but they wanted to stand out, and they got the idea. They liked horror movies and stuff like that, and they were a little dramatic. They had a dramatic flair, so they had the idea of, well, look around. It's the 60s. All these bands are wearing flowers in their hair, and they're all the good guys, and they said, well, we need to be the villain. So we're just going to go out there with blood and guts and boa constrictors, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just a vaudeville thing. This is long before even the whole show of like, oh, this band is like Satan worshipping or makes a deal with the devil. It was all for show. Alice Cooper's father, his name was Vincent before he changed his name to Alice Cooper, but his father is a Baptist minister. And Alice himself never turned his back on all of his religion. Now, he didn't really take it seriously until, later years. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, he talks about his dad. A Baptist minister would say, no, I get it. They're all Peter Pan, so you're being Captain Hook. He got it that it was a show. So that is the thing. It's far from an idea of like an Ozzy Osbourne even later, or, what's that other band? Him, I think they're called now. Other bands and whatnot today who play into the idea of a Satanism or something like that more. Probably, again, more for show. But anyway, this is way before that. Sort of a vaudevillian-style horror show they would put on. And they would started to do concept albums. Alice Cooper himself got into this more when he broke away from the band. So they called themselves Alice Cooper because they thought it was funny. That's the name of a little girl, So in the 60s, people would come, who's this new act, Alice Cooper? Oh, I wonder if she's, like, what kind of music is she going to play with us, play for us? And then this band of these guys come out in makeup and everything, doing all this stuff. But everybody thought, because their band was a proper name, that the lead singer was Alice Cooper. So Vincent Furnier changed his name legally to Alice Cooper. And that's how we got where we were. But he had battled alcoholism quite a bit throughout his life, and did a relapse into it. Early 80s, he's still Alice Cooper. I mean, he's never going to be forgotten, but he was struggling a little bit, for some relevance in the ratings and whatnot. He was struggling with the alcoholism. He eventually got that under control. He beat that, and he came back with the most epic comeback album ever, Trash is what the album was called, and it gave us the hit Poison, House of Fire, just so many great hits from that. He's working with all these wonderful, this is around 1989, and he's working with all of these great artists of the day, John Bon Jovi, guys from Motley Crue, of course the guys from Aerosmith that he knew and was friends with, for a while back. So that was a great comeback, and after that he did the album Hey Stupid, also in that vein of the sort of tail end of the hair rock, kind of vibe. Of course, that was the album that he did during the Wayne's World phase, you know, the I'm Not Worthy, Feed My Frankenstein, all that great stuff. 1994 rolls around, and this is, you know, if we look back in hindsight, this is clearly the end of the era of the hair metal. You know, grunge is really coming in already. Grunge is, you know, hair metal is pretty much dead. I think Skid Row talks about how they like literally went from touring in these grand tour buses, top of the world, to like sleeping in vans, you know, and playing at carnivals. I mean, it was that big of a deal if you weren't as big as someone, say like Alice Cooper or whatever. But I found it interesting that he made the choice in 1994 not to even try to put out another big sort of hair rock, you know, style album or anything and kind of follow the trend. He went back to the thing that he was most known for, and that is the concept album. You know, Welcome to My Nightmare, that kind of stuff. And that is what The Last Temptation is. It's a concept album. It's a brilliant concept album. He was, I've got an older video that I did way back on like one of my first years of the channel when I was doing like a 31 Days of Halloween. And I talk about, Alice Cooper actually did a comic book. Neil Gaiman, the writer, of course, does the concept, helped him come up with the concept of this album. And they came up with a story for it, and Neil Gaiman wrote the comic. And I did this whole video where I talk about the comic and the story. It's very like a Ray Bradbury type tale. And so I'm going to attach that video to the end of this video, just talking about the album. But I wanted to talk about the album some. The album tells the story, not as detailed as scene by scene as a comic would do, but the album tells the story, and it's a very Faustian-like story of being a young guy, tempted by the world, tempted by these forces, specifically a supernatural entity. You know, you can definitely see Alice's Christian, you know, faith come through in this. And I find that inspiring as well, because when Alice decided to really embrace his Christian faith, he didn't go off and become a Christian artist. No, and ended up doing a bunch of crappy music. But he didn't compromise his faith either. He didn't see any kind of contradiction in being Alice Cooper on stage. You know, he had said for a while that, you know, he plays a character on stage. Alice Cooper, the character who's getting beheaded or whatever, you know, it's a character. It's absurdist theater. It's vaudevillian, kind of old B-rated horror. You know, it's that kind of commentary, kind of fun thing. But it's all entertainment. There's no commentary like political commentary or anything like that. And he said, you know, he might have changed a little thing or two that he might would have done on stage, you know, once he really started taking his faith seriously, but he didn't see the need, and everybody still respected him. You know, that's a big deal. He decided to stay true to his values that he had, his morals that he had there, in an industry that, let's be honest, you know, isn't certainly friendly to those kinds of values. And as a result, I mean, he ended up, you know, Dave Mustaine, a lot of other rockers, you know, even from the metal field, end up coming into faith partly, you know, through Alice Cooper. But not that he was ever preaching to anybody. He always said, I don't talk about my faith unless they ask me a question about it. Otherwise, they'll just see the way I'm living, and if they're cool with it, they're cool with it. If they're not, you know, whatever. So it's inspiring to me to see somebody just be true to their faith or true to their values, morals, ethics, or whatever, and still pursue their interests, even if a large portion of the world will say, well, those two don't go together, or, you know, whatever. Because he did some, even after the Last Temptation album, man, he did some great Brutal Planet, the Dragon album, I'm forgetting that one. He's got a lot of stuff. Of course, he's putting out stuff now. Of course, now, still doing his solo artist music, but then also playing in the Hollywood Vampires with Johnny Depp and Joe Perry from Aerosmith. So I'll leave that second video, the old video. I'll post that here. This is supposed to be a longer video overall. I'll tack it on to the end to talk really much more about the story here. But I will tell you about the music itself. Killer. He's got the guys from Damn Yankees that play on this with him. Chris Cornell. The song, if you've never really had a concept album, it does tell a general story. Opening song, Sideshow, really just makes you feel like you're at a carnival. And you've got that sort of young kid wanting some diversion, wanting some action, you know, going for a sideshow or something like that. The second song is the one I'll link, because for each one of these album videos, I'll link to a song. It's called Nothing's Free. And that's when our supernatural entity comes in, and it's the showman in this story. It's played by Alice Cooper himself. Comes in and tries to tempt this young boy. And the music is so Faustian. I mean, it really is like a representation of Mephistopheles from the, you know, Goethe's play come right out and come into a rock song. I mean, the tone of it, the drums that it opens with, the keys, the way Alice Cooper's voice comes through it. It's wonderful. The way that it It even breaks into sort of a rap, not rap, but it's not rap. That's the wrong word. But more than singing, it's more like a fast pace, rhyme. It's really cool. So I'm gonna put the link there to that. Wonderful, wonderful piece. There's so many other greats on this. You might know the hit "Lost in America" that came from this album. "You're My Temptation" is a great one. That's really about one of the characters in the book is named for that song, Mercy, her name. But it's about someone realizing something that is their temptation, something that they are tempted to do. And you can look at that metaphorically like a drug, Alice Cooper and alcohol, or, somebody, tempted to, have an extramarital affair or whatever. But it's, you see somebody that's your temptation, and you feel the sense of struggle in that song. It's so amazing. But I will put the link to Nothing's Free. I recommend you go check out the whole album, The Last Temptation. It's really solid stuff, especially if you're a Chris Cornell fan. His voice comes through a lot on this album as well, the late, great Chris Cornell. So I could prattle on about these quite a bit, but Alice Cooper is awesome. He is a personal hero of mine, from his personal life as well as his art, his music, the way he's always conducted himself. Even when he was like crazy at the height of his alcoholism, everybody who met him would always tell you what a nice guy he really is. Oh, yeah, I saw him out in the golf course, and this guy who's, supposedly biting off the heads of chickens, that never happened, but, on stage is just the nicest guy in the world you'd meet, and that's the case. So, really great, great artist. If you're not Alice Cooper fan, but you like that type of music, you should check some of it out. It's pretty sweet. He's got a long, long history, a long catalog of music, from the Alice Cooper Band to himself to Hollywood Vampires and so forth. But The Last Temptation is a solid, amazing album from 1994. So that's where I'll stop there. You can keep watching if you want to see my video on the story he and Neil Gaiman wrote. Very Bradburian, very kind of gets you in the mood for Halloween, October. I don't know about you, but I am certainly waiting for October very eagerly. So that's all for now. I'll come back with, I've got a few other albums in mind to do this kind of treatment of. But till next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the hero stories and the music that you draw inspiration from. Thanks for watching. So I started listening to it, and it was a little different. It's a concept album, whereas Trash or Hey Stupid, they weren't concept albums. So it was my first new Alice Cooper concept album listening to it. And it was just, there's a magic to it. There's something great. So I'll tell you about the kind of story this is in a second, and what makes it so special. But he knew he wanted to do a concept album, and he knew he wanted it to be about a general good versus evil, but a good triumph over evil. And really, Alice Cooper's stuff has always been about good versus evil, even if it glorifies in the evil a bit, with his beheadings on stage and such. But the album was great. It was solid. He had a lot of great people. He had musicians from the Damn Yankees. Chris Cornell, the recently passed great Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, wrote one song for the album for Alice Cooper, and then co-wrote one song and played guitar and sang, and was just a great addition. So a lot of great musicians came and worked on it with him, and it's just a solid story. It's so wonderful, very, very Ray Bradbury, and I'll come back to what I mean by that. But the story goes that Alice Cooper had his people called Neil Gaiman's people, because Alice Cooper was a fan of the Sandman series, the great Sandman comic book series that Neil Gaiman was doing, or had done at the time. And they agreed to work with, Neil Gaiman agreed to work with him on coming up with the story and the concept of this album together. And that's all it was at first. They were just going to create the concept together, and they did so. Neil Gaiman brought in Dave McKean, his artist that he used to collaborate with a lot, or still does, and brought him in to make the album cover. So that's what you're seeing on the album, and the edition that I have anyway of The Last Temptation, the David McKean art, which is so great with Alice Cooper's face transposed there. And that was it. The album was released. It was a big hit. But then they felt like they needed to go a little extra step, because, like I said, a concept album doesn't tell the story beginning to end word for word. A concept album is sort of flipping through a scrapbook of a story. And they wanted to tell the story beginning to end, so they got together and fleshed it all. Well, it's probably already fleshed out, but they put it in comic script form. Neil Gaiman actually wrote it out as a full graphic novel. And Dave McKean wasn't available at that point. They had Michael Zulli come in, and Michael Zulli is a great artist. Did some great work there. So let me show you this. I'll show you some of the Michael Zulli art inside. It's gorgeous. This is a recent edition that came out, by the way. It's an anniversary or something like that edition, which has, because they put out a couple editions. It first came out in comic book form, single issue comic book form. It was like a 4-comic series, I think. And there was that. Then they collected it in a black and white edition for some reason. I don't know why they did that. I have that, but the color is so great that I wanted the color. So when this came out, I was really excited. It's got notes from the original script in the back. It's got some letters that Neil Gaiman wrote to Alice as they were, fleshing everything out and stuff like that. But the art's just gorgeous. Love that art. So the basic premise behind this, I'll go ahead and say it. If you've ever read or you know about Something Wicked This Way Comes, the great novel by Ray Bradbury, that's a real influence in this. And they nod to it. They homage it. Stephen, the main character, he's at school at one point, and the Something Wicked This Way is on his desk. So it's a young boy, Halloween time at school. He's about middle school age-ish there, kind of the it age, of those children. And meets this mysterious showman, who of course is played in the comic by Alice Cooper. And the mysterious showman opens up a theater, a live theater, Theater Real, Theater of the Real, I think it's they call it. It's based on some old French, or Italian horror theaters and stuff like that. Really great stuff. And this mysterious theater pops up, and Alice Cooper's his character, the showman's obviously very supernatural, and he's tempting Stephen, luring Stephen into this, gives him a free ticket, and wants him to come see this show, and the show's going to be all about real life, and just going to be great. This was when I bought the CD, you folded out the cover, and this was the spread that it teased for the comic book. So I was really excited about that, to see that beautiful artwork, and just great. This is a character by the name of Mercy, who's a really fascinating character in it. You don't know quite what she is or who she is, and in the end, even the explanation they gives still makes me wonder. She sticks with you. It's really great. So the Michael Zulli art's gorgeous. The coloring there and everything, just beautiful. And the Alice Cooper likeness is perfect, as it should be. This is not Alice Cooper's first foray into comics either. He had his first comic back in the 70s, I think, and I'm actually going to be looking at some other of his appearances in comic books the rest of this month, so he'll be back, and hopefully Neil Gaiman will be back too. As I look at my list, there's plenty that he's done that's Halloween related that I could definitely talk about, so excited to talk about him some more as well. But such a great story. It's timely as well right now, because with the popularity of it and the film, and everybody's going back and reading the books, this is very much in that genre of a greater evil out there that adults can't quite fathom. It's very much about growing up, as all of these stories are. Growing up is scary, and in good stories like this, or like Something Wicked This Way Comes, or like Stephen King's It, the monster should not straight allegorically, but the monster should serve as some kind of metaphor for adult responsibility, or for the fear and the uncertainty of history and growing up. The uncertainty of the future, rather, and of growing up. And that's what the showman really is trying to terrify Stephen about. Everything he shows him on the stage, he's trying to say, this is your future. This is what you've got going for you. Chances are, statistically, this, blah, 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 blah. Why don't you just stay here? Stay here and be young forever. And these are all the things that I can offer you. These are all of the, stay here and avoid all of that horror and just stay with me, and that's the temptation for anybody who sees a bleak future ahead of them, no matter what age they are, whether they get out by suicide or by deciding they're just going to escape and bury their head, in whatever it is, whether it's drugs or whether it's even a fandom. Honestly, I've known people who do that, sadly. But so that's a real human struggle, and it's really exhibited in these stories, and Neil Gaiman does it smashingly, and Alice Cooper conceived of it smashingly, and Alice Cooper sells the story wonderfully on the album. Highly recommended if you're interested in that sort of classic rock sound at all. Alice Cooper is definitely a great artist for that. Just to pitch it for him, because he needs me, marketing for him. He recently released a new album called Paranormal. It was released last month, I think, or maybe late August. But it's a great album. This one's actually not a concept album. Occasionally he does non-concept albums. But what makes this one so interesting is that he treated it like it was the Twilight Zone, the series. So it's like an anthology album where every story is its own, every song rather, it's its own specific different little story, but they're all thematically linked to the weird or to the to the uncanny and stuff like that. So great album, highly recommend that. A lot of people, a lot of the guys from the original Alice Cooper band come back. Ever since Glenn Buxton's death, they've come back and started working together a lot more, which is fun. And then some great guest musicians on that as well. So highly recommend that. Highly recommend the album. Highly recommend the book. If you're a fan of this kind of stuff, if you like It and Something Wicked This Way Comes and that kind of stuff with the children against the great evil, I think there's something so seminal in that type of story. You can really trace back stories like that quite a ways back in culture. So good stuff.